It was a hot summer day in the small town of Westwood, and the sky was a clear blue without a cloud in sight. Laura Collins, a meteorologist at the local news station, was preparing for her evening broadcast when she heard a strange rumbling noise outside. Curious, she stepped out onto the balcony to investigate. As she looked up at the sky, she saw something she had never witnessed before. A bolt of lightning struck the ground just a few feet away from her, causing her to jump back in shock. The sound was deafening, and she could feel the electricity in the air. She had never seen lightning strike so close to her before. The next day, Laura learned that the lightning had killed a young boy who had been playing outside in his yard. It was a tragic accident, and everyone in town was shaken by the news. But as the days passed, more lightning strikes occurred, each one more bizarre than the last. One strike hit a man walking his dog, leaving him with burns all over his body. Another hit a car, causing it to explode in a ball of flames. And still another hit a house, causing the roof to collapse and trapping a family inside. Laura knew that something was wrong. Lightning strikes were common during the summer months, but this was different. These strikes were more powerful and more lethal than anything she had ever seen before. She started investigating, trying to find a pattern or explanation for the strange occurrences. That's when she met Jack Mitchell, the local detective. They had never worked together before, but they both knew that they needed each other's expertise to solve the case. Together, they combed through the evidence, looking for anything that might connect the victims. As they dug deeper, they discovered an unsettling secret. All the victims had one thing in common. They had all been involved in a lawsuit against a local energy company that had been accused of polluting the town's water supply. The company had denied any wrongdoing, but the victims were determined to seek justice. It was a shocking revelation, and Laura and Jack knew that they had to act quickly. They suspected that the company had developed a new technology that could control lightning strikes, and they were using it as a weapon against those who opposed them. But how could they prove it? The company was powerful and had the resources to cover their tracks. Laura and Jack had to act fast if they were going to save more lives. As they continued to investigate, they found a witness who had seen a strange device near the scene of one of the lightning strikes. It was a device that had been developed by the energy company, and it could control the weather. Laura and Jack knew that they had found their culprit. They rushed to the energy company's headquarters, armed with the evidence they needed to prove their case. But when they arrived, they were met with resistance. The company had hired a team of lawyers to defend themselves, and they were determined to keep their secret safe. It was a tense standoff, but Laura and Jack refused to back down. They presented their evidence, and the company was forced to confess to their wrongdoing. They had developed a new technology that could control the weather, and they had been using it to strike down their opponents. It was a shocking revelation, and the town was outraged. The energy company was forced to pay compensation to the victims' families, and they were banned from ever using their technology again. Laura and Jack had saved the town from a deadly threat, but the memory of those lightning strikes would haunt them forever. They had uncovered a dark secret that challenged their understanding of natural phenomena, and they knew that they would never look at a thunderstorm the same way again. As the group of friends set out on their camping trip, they were excited about the adventure that lay ahead. They had planned to spend the next few days exploring the wilderness and soaking up the beauty of nature. However, things took a dark turn when a sudden and unrelenting thunderstorm descended upon them, catching them off guard. The rain came down in sheets, and the wind howled like a pack of wolves. The group tried to set up their tents, but they were no match for the storm's ferocity. They soon realized that they needed to find shelter, or they would be in grave danger. That's when they spotted an old, abandoned house in the distance. It looked like it had been standing there for decades, and the group hesitated before deciding to seek refuge inside. As they entered the house, a chill ran down their spines, and they could feel the weight of history bearing down upon them. The interior of the house was dilapidated, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and mold growing on the walls. The furniture was ancient and covered in dust, and the floors creaked underfoot. It was clear that no one had lived there for a long time. As the storm raged on outside, the group tried to make themselves comfortable, but they couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. It was as if the house was alive, watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. Then one of the friends stumbled upon an old diary hidden away in a dusty corner of the house. The diary belonged to the previous occupants of the house, and as they began to read it, they realized that the family had vanished under sinister circumstances. The diary was filled with cryptic entries and strange symbols, and it became clear that the family had been involved in some kind of dark and twisted ritual. The group tried to put the diary away, but they couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being watched. As the night wore on, the storm outside intensified, and the group became more and more anxious. They could hear strange noises coming from all around the house, and the feeling of dread that had been gnawing at them all evening grew more intense. Suddenly, they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from upstairs. They all froze in terror, not daring to move a muscle. Then, they heard footsteps, heavy and deliberate, coming down the stairs. The group knew then that they were not alone in the house. The door to the room burst open, and standing before them was a figure clad in black, with eyes that seemed to pierce their very souls. The group screamed in terror, but it was too late. The figure lunged forward, and the room was plunged into darkness. The storm outside continued to rage on, as if mocking the turmoil that had taken hold of the group's souls. The abandoned house stood silent and still, hiding the horrifying truth about its past. And the group of friends, who had set out on a camping trip full of hope and excitement, had now become victims of a sinister force beyond their comprehension. When the group of friends woke up, they found themselves in a different part of the house. It was a small room with no windows, and the walls were covered with strange symbols and markings. They were all tied up, unable to move or speak. The storm had died down, and the silence was eerie. They could hear the sound of footsteps coming closer and closer, and their hearts beat faster with every passing second. The figure from before entered the room, and the group could see that it was a woman. She was dressed in black robes, and her face was shrouded in darkness. She approached them slowly, holding a rusty knife in her hand. The woman spoke in a language that they didn't understand, and her voice sent chills down their spines. She moved closer and closer, and the group could feel her breath on their faces. They tried to scream, but their voices were muffled by the gags in their mouths. Just as the woman was about to strike, the front door of the house burst open, and a group of policemen rushed in. They had been searching for the missing family, and they had finally found them. The woman was arrested, and the group of friends were untied and taken to safety. They later learned that the woman was a member of a cult that had been practicing dark rituals in the abandoned house for years. The group of friends were traumatized by their experience, but they were grateful to be alive. They realized that the world was a much darker place than they had ever imagined, and that evil lurked in the most unexpected places. As they left the abandoned house behind, they knew that they would never forget the horror that they had experienced. The storm had passed, but the scars that it had left on their souls would never fully heal. Sarah had always dreamed of becoming a successful journalist, but her troubled past had made it difficult for her to find a foothold in the industry. After years of struggling, she decided to move to a small coastal town to start a new life and pursue her passion. The town was known for its intense thunderstorms that seemed to happen every year on the anniversary of a tragic accident, but Sarah had no idea how much danger she was about to face. Sarah arrived in the town just as the clouds started to darken and the winds picked up. She found a small apartment near the beach and settled in, excited to start her new life. But as the storm approached, she began to feel uneasy. There was something about the town that didn't feel right, something dark and foreboding. As the storm raged outside, Sarah started to dig deeper into the town's history. She discovered that a tragedy had occurred many years ago when a group of fishermen went out to sea during a thunderstorm and never returned. The town had never fully recovered from the loss, and the anniversary of the tragedy was still marked by intense thunderstorms every year. Sarah's investigations led her to a web of secrets and lies. She discovered that the town was not what it seemed, and that there were dark forces at work just below the surface. But the more she uncovered, the more danger she found herself in. As the storm reached its peak, Sarah made a chilling revelation. She had uncovered evidence that the tragedy all those years ago was not an accident, but rather a deliberate act of violence, and the people responsible were still living in the town, hiding in plain sight. Sarah knew that she had to act fast if she wanted to stay alive. She gathered her evidence and made a run for it, but she was too late. The storm had cut off all the roads, and she was trapped in the town with the people who wanted her dead. As the night wore on, Sarah found herself fighting for her life. She was chased through the dark and stormy streets, dodging lightning strikes and trying to stay one step ahead of her pursuers. But she was outnumbered and outgunned, and it seemed like there was no way out. Just when all hope seemed lost, Sarah had an unexpected ally. She stumbled upon a group of townspeople who had also uncovered the truth about the tragedy and were ready to fight back against the forces of evil. Together, they faced off against the town's dark secret, fighting tooth and nail to survive the night. As Sarah left the town, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered inside her. She had uncovered the truth, but at what cost? Her life had been in danger, and the people she had trusted turned out to be the very ones who wanted her dead. As she drove away, Sarah knew that she would never forget the horrors that she had witnessed. She had seen firsthand the darkness that lay just beneath the surface of this seemingly peaceful coastal town, and she knew that there were likely other towns like this, with secrets buried deep beneath their pristine exteriors. For months afterward, Sarah tried to move on from the experience. She started a new job, made new friends, and tried to forget about the horrors of that stormy night. But it wasn't long before the nightmares began. Every night, Sarah found herself back in the town, facing off against the forces of darkness once again. The thunder roared, the lightning flashed, and she ran for her life through the dark and stormy streets. She tried to ignore the nightmares, but they only grew worse as time went on. Eventually, she started to investigate the town again, hoping to find closure and put her fears to rest. But as she dug deeper, she found something that chilled her to the bone. The town had been destroyed by a massive hurricane just a few weeks after she had left. The same hurricane that Sarah had dreamed about every night since she had left. Sarah couldn't believe it. Had the town been destroyed as a punishment for the evil that had been done there? Or was it just a coincidence? She knew that she would never know for sure. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The nightmares had stopped after the town's destruction, but she couldn't help but feel like there was still more to the story. She decided to do some more digging, even though it made her uneasy. She started by reaching out to the few people she had met in the town. Most of them had moved away after the hurricane, but a few still remained. To her surprise, they all seemed to share her sense of unease. They had all felt like there was something dark and foreboding about the town, even before the storm. One woman stood out. Her name was Lily, and she had lived in the town her whole life. She was the only person who seemed willing to talk about the town's dark secrets. Lily told Sarah about the night of the tragedy and how the town had never been the same since. She spoke of strange occurrences like unexplained disappearances and strange sightings in the woods. And she told Sarah about a local legend that had been passed down through the generations. According to the legend, the town had been built on Native American burial ground. The spirits of the dead were said to be angry at the town's inhabitants for disturbing their final resting place. And every year, on the anniversary of the tragedy, the spirits would rise up and exact their revenge on the living. Sarah was skeptical of the legend, but Lily's words sent a chill down her spine. Was it possible that the town's destruction had been the work of vengeful spirits? She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than she had initially thought. Sarah continued her investigations, but she found no concrete evidence to support the legend. But the feeling of unease persisted, and she knew that she would never be able to put the town's secrets behind her completely. Years later, Sarah was still haunted by the memory of that stormy night. She had moved on with her life, but she could never forget the horrors that she had witnessed, and she knew that there were likely other towns out there with secrets just as dark as the one she had uncovered. As she looked out at the stormy sea once again, Sarah couldn't help but wonder, was there really a curse on the town, or was it all just a coincidence? She would never know for sure, but one thing was certain, she would never forget the terror of that stormy night and the dark secrets that lay hidden in the town by the sea. Arthur had always been a talented composer, but his troubled past had taken its toll on his music career. He was a recluse, shying away from socializing with people, and was always seen with his headphones on. Despite his reputation as a loner, his works were always powerful and touched the hearts of anyone who heard them. One day, Arthur stumbled upon an old recording of thunder while listening to nature sounds to help him sleep. He was instantly captivated by the sound and believed it to be the key to a groundbreaking symphony. He spent countless hours listening to a recording and studying the different patterns and frequencies of thunder. He was obsessed with capturing the essence of a tempest in his music. After weeks of studying and experimenting, Arthur decided to retreat to a secluded cabin during a powerful storm. He believed that being in the midst of a storm would help him capture the true essence of thunder in his music. He packed his things and drove for hours to reach the cabin. As he arrived at the cabin, the storm was already raging outside. He quickly unpacked his equipment and began setting up his studio in the cabin. The storm grew more intense, with lightning flashing and thunder rumbling in the distance. Despite the chaos outside, Arthur remained focused on his work, determined to capture the perfect sound. As he worked, he began to notice strange occurrences in the cabin. The walls seemed to be pulsing with energy, and the sound of the storm grew louder and more intense. It was as if the cabin was alive with the storm's energy. Arthur began to feel uneasy, but was unable to stop working on his masterpiece. He worked for hours, becoming increasingly consumed by his music. The storm outside grew even more powerful, with lightning striking closer and thunder booming louder. As Arthur continued to work, he began to feel as if he was losing touch with reality. The line between his imagination and reality began to blur, and he was unable to distinguish between the two. It was then that Arthur realized the true nature of the storm. It wasn't just a natural occurrence, but an entity with a will of its own. The storm had taken over the cabin and was using Arthur's obsession with thunder to control him. He was trapped in the cabin, unable to escape the storm's grasp. The storm continued to rage outside, and Arthur knew that he had to finish his symphony before it was too late. He poured all of his energy and focus into his music, pushing himself to the brink of exhaustion. In the end, he was able to create the masterpiece he had so desperately sought, but at a great cost. As the final notes of his symphony echoed through the cabin, the storm outside began to dissipate. Arthur collapsed onto the floor, exhausted but relieved that he had succeeded. But as he looked up, he realized that he was no longer alone in the cabin. There, standing before him, was the embodiment of the storm itself. It was a grotesque, swirling mass of energy that seemed to be alive. Arthur was filled with terror, realizing that he had created something far beyond his control. The storm had become his antagonist, and he was powerless against it. The storm began to envelop Arthur, consuming him in its energy. He screamed in agony as he felt his body being torn apart. In his final moments, he realized that his obsession with thunder had led him to his ultimate demise. The storm had used his passion for music against him, and he had paid the price. The news of Arthur's mysterious disappearance spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the music community. Some believed that he had run away, unable to handle the pressure of creating a masterpiece. Others believed that he had met with a tragic accident in the storm. As time passed, Arthur's legacy grew. His final symphony became legendary, hailed as a masterpiece that captured the essence of the storm like no other piece of music had before. People traveled from all over the world to hear it performed, and it became a staple in the repertoire of orchestras around the globe. But despite the accolades and praise, there were those who believed that Arthur's symphony had a darker origin. Rumors began to circulate that the storm itself had played a role in the creation of the piece. Some even claimed that Arthur had made a deal with the devil to create it. The truth behind Arthur's disappearance and the creation of his final symphony remained a mystery. But for those who knew him, there was no denying that the storm had played a powerful role in his life and work. It had been both his muse and his downfall, a force of nature that he had never been able to truly understand or control. As the years passed, the cabin where Arthur had disappeared became a place of legend. It was said that on stormy nights, one could still hear the faint echoes of his final symphony, a haunting reminder of the price that he had paid for his obsession with thunder. As the first rumble of thunder echoed through the town of Riverton, Emily and Jake were curled up on the couch, watching a movie. The storm outside was intense, and the rain was coming down in sheets. Suddenly, a loud crack split the air, and the power flickered off. "Great," Emily muttered, sitting up. "Looks like we're going to be in the dark for a while." Jake grunted in agreement, and they both reached for their phones, hoping to get a signal. But as they checked their screens, they realized something was wrong. "No service," Jake said, frowning. "That's weird." Emily's heart started to pound in her chest. She knew that Riverton was prone to flash floods, and with a storm this heavy, it was only a matter of time before the river overflowed. "Jake," she said, grabbing his arm, "we need to get to higher ground. Now." He looked at her, startled, and then nodded. They hurried to grab some supplies, and then rushed out into the storm. The streets were already starting to flood, and the water was rising fast. Emily and Jake sloshed through the murky water, trying to find a way to higher ground. But as they turned a corner, they realized that they were trapped. The water had risen so high that it was up to their waists, and the current was strong enough to knock them off their feet. They huddled together, trying to stay upright as the water surged around them. Suddenly, Emily felt something brush against her leg, and she shrieked in terror. She couldn't see anything in the murky water, but she knew that Riverton was home to some dangerous wildlife. "Jake," she said, her voice shaking, "we have to get out of here. Now." He nodded, and they struggled to push their way through the water. But as they turned another corner, they saw something that made their blood run cold. Ahead of them, a dark figure was standing in the water. It was humanoid, but it moved in a way that was decidedly unnatural. Emily and Jake froze in fear, unable to move as the figure approached them. As it got closer, they saw that it was a person, but one that was horribly disfigured. Its skin was mottled and scaly, and its eyes were black pits in its head. It opened its mouth, revealing razor-sharp teeth, and let out a guttural growl. Emily and Jake turned and ran, their hearts pounding in their chests. They could hear the creature splashing after them, and they knew that they were in mortal danger. Emily and Jake sprinted through the flooded streets, trying to put as much distance between themselves and the creature as possible. But as they turned yet another corner, they found themselves face to face with another horror. The water had risen even higher, and now they were up to their chests in the murky floodwaters. But it wasn't the water that made their blood run cold, it was the body that was floating towards them. It was a man, or at least it had been. Now, it was bloated and discolored, its skin peeling away from its bones. Emily and Jake could see maggots wriggling in its open wounds, and they stumbled back, retching in horror. But as they backed away, they realized that they were trapped. The water had risen too high to turn back, and there was no way to climb higher without risking electrocution from the power lines that were still hanging low. They were stuck, trapped between two horrors, with no escape in sight. As they stood there, frozen in terror, they heard a voice behind them. "Hey!" The voice called out. "Over here." Emily and Jake turned, and they saw a figure waving to them from a nearby rooftop. It was a man, and he was beckoning to them urgently. Without hesitation, they splashed towards the building, climbing up the makeshift ladder that the man had set up. As they reached the top, they collapsed in exhaustion, gasping for air. "Who are you?" Emily asked, panting. The man looked at them grimly. "My name is Sam. I've been living up here for years, waiting for this moment." "What moment?" Jake asked, confused. Sam's eyes flickered towards the floodwaters. The moment when Riverton would be destroyed. You see, this town was built on a lie, a terrible secret that's been buried for generations. And now, the water is finally bringing it to the surface. Emily and Jake looked at each other in horror. They knew that Sam was right. Something terrible was happening in Riverton, and they were caught in the middle of it. "What do we do?" Emily asked, her voice shaking. Sam looked at them gravely. "We survive, and we find out the truth about this town, no matter what it takes." For the next few hours, Emily, Jake, and Sam huddled on the rooftop, watching as the floodwaters continued to rise. They could see other people trapped in the water below, their desperate cries echoing through the storm. But as the night wore on, the water began to recede. The storm was passing, and the sun would soon be rising. Sam stood up, shaking out his stiff muscles. "We need to get down there," he said, gesturing to the street below. "We need to help whoever we can." Emily and Jake nodded, and they followed Sam down the ladder. As they waded through the water, they saw the full extent of the damage. Houses were destroyed, cars were overturned, and the streets were littered with debris. But worst of all were the bodies, dozens of them, scattered throughout the town. Emily felt sick as she looked at them. She knew that some of them had been her neighbors, people she'd seen every day, and now they were gone, victims of a disaster that no one could have predicted. But as they continued to search for survivors, Emily and Jake started to realize that there was something more going on. They saw strange symbols spray-painted on the sides of buildings and heard rumors of a secret society that had been operating in the town for years. And then they found the bodies of the town council floating in the flooded town hall. It was a grisly sight. The council members had been brutally murdered, their bodies mutilated beyond recognition. Emily and Jake felt sick as they looked at them, knowing that they had been in the same room as these people just a few days ago. As they stumbled out of the town hall, they saw something that made them freeze in terror. On the other side of the street, a figure was standing in the shadows. It was humanoid, but its skin was mottled and scaly, and its eyes were black pits in its head. It was the same creature they had seen earlier, and it was holding something in its hands, something that glinted in the moonlight. A knife. The creature took a step forward, and Emily and Jake turned and ran. They could hear its footsteps behind them, and they knew that they were in mortal danger. They ran through the flooded streets, splashing through the water as fast as they could. But as they turned a corner, they saw something that made them stop in their tracks. It was a boat, bobbing in the water, and in the boat was a figure, beckoning to them urgently. "Get in," the figure called out. "Hurry." Without hesitation, Emily and Jake jumped into the boat, their hearts pounding in their chests. The figure pushed them off from the shore, and they drifted out into the floodwaters. As they looked back, they saw the creature on the shore, watching them with its dead eyes. And then they heard a gunshot. Emily, Jake, and the figure in the boat drifted away from the shore, trying to put as much distance between themselves and the creature as possible. They could still hear the sound of the gunshot echoing through the storm, and they knew that danger was still lurking nearby. As they drifted further away from the town, they looked back at the floodwaters that had caused so much devastation. Emily felt a deep sense of loss for the town that had been her home, now destroyed by a disaster that had been both natural and man-made. But as they looked forward, they saw something that made their blood run cold. In the distance, they could see a series of lights, moving slowly through the storm. At first, they thought it was a rescue team, coming to save them from the flooded town. But as the lights got closer, they saw that it was something else entirely. It was a convoy of trucks, each one marked with a symbol that Emily and Jake recognized from the graffiti they had seen throughout the town. And in the lead truck was a figure they knew all too well, the mayor of Riverton, who had been missing since the flood had begun. He was alive, but he was not alone. In the back of the truck were dozens of people, bound and gagged, their faces twisted in fear. Emily and Jake could see that they were people from the town, their neighbors and friends, taken against their will and forced into captivity. As the convoy passed them by, Emily and Jake knew that they had to act. They couldn't let this go on any longer. They had to save the people who had been taken and bring the truth about the town to the surface. They looked at the figure in the boat with them, hoping for guidance. But the figure just looked at them, his face inscrutable. "We have to stop them," Jake said, his voice shaking. "We have to save those people." Emily nodded in agreement, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that they were risking their lives, but she couldn't stand by and watch while a town was destroyed by this dark force. They set off after the convoy, using the boat to follow their path. As they got closer, they saw that the trucks were heading towards an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. It was a place that Emily and Jake had never been to before, but they knew that it was the heart of the dark force that had been operating in the town for generations. As they docked the boat and approached the factory, they could see that there were guards posted outside, armed and ready for anything. But Emily, Jake, and the figure in the boat were not deterred. They had come too far to turn back now. They charged towards the guards, their hearts pounding in their chests. The guards opened fire, but they were no match for the determination of the three friends. In moments, they had taken out the guards and were storming into the factory, determined to save the people who had been taken. As they ran through the darkened hallways, they could hear the sounds of screams and moans coming from deeper within the building. But they did not falter. They knew that they had to keep going, no matter what. And then they saw the cages. rows upon rows of cages filled with people from the town. They were all in various states of distress, some crying, some screaming, some just staring blankly ahead. Emily and Jake's hearts broke as they saw the people they had grown up with, trapped like animals in this dark place. But they did not hesitate. They broke open the cages, setting the people free and leading them towards the exit. As they ran through the factory, they saw something that made them stop in their tracks. In the center of the factory was a room filled with strange symbols and arcane artifacts. And standing in the middle of the room was the mayor of Riverton, holding a ritual knife in one hand and a book in the other. He looked up as Emily, Jake, and the figure in the boat burst into the room, his eyes filled with rage. "You fools," he shouted. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? You're unleashing a force that you can't control." Emily and Jake stood their ground, their hearts pounding in their chests. They knew that they were risking their lives by confronting the mayor, but they had come too far to back down now. "You're the one who's unleashed a force that can't be controlled," Emily said, her voice shaking with anger. "You've destroyed this town, and for what? For power? For money?" The mayor sneered at her. "You have no idea what you're talking about. This town was founded on a lie, a secret that has been kept for generations. And now, we're finally going to bring that secret to the surface, no matter what it takes." He lunged towards them, his knife glinting in the dim light. But Emily, Jake, and the figure in the boat were ready for him. They charged towards him, their fists flying, and soon the mayor was on the ground, his knife clattering to the floor. And then they heard a voice behind them. "Well done, my children." They turned, and they saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was an old man, with white hair and piercing blue eyes. He wore a robe, embroidered with strange symbols, and he held a staff in one hand. He looked at them gravely. "You have done well to stop the mayor, but you have only scratched the surface of what lies beneath this town." Emily and Jake felt a sense of dread wash over them. They knew that this old man was the key to the secrets of Riverton, but they also knew that his secrets were dark and dangerous. "Who are you?" Jake asked, his voice shaking. The old man smiled. "I am the founder of Riverton, and now it is time for you to learn the truth." And with that, he beckoned them deeper into the factory, towards the heart of the darkness that had consumed their town for generations.